What up, y'all? It's T-Tar, and today we're going to be talking about the Ruinous Pokemon leader theory that I shared last time. Listen, I love the Kintaro theory, but I always got to cycle through new ideas just to keep myself entertained. So we're talking about this now. So to summarize what we talked about last time, it was a really cool idea. The idea is that when the 4 Ruinous Pokemon, watch the video, it makes it sound much cooler. When the 4 Ruinous Pokemon destroyed the kingdom, that happened to the Paldean King, and that gorilla, who's the mythical Pokemon, is the Paldean King, and he became the 5th Ruinous Pokemon, their leader. Listen, the reason I pose this idea is because Game Freak is trying all kinds of new things out, and I think this would be a cool one to add to their arsenal. So the gist of it, now we're going to talk about this idea more in this video. The gist of it is that this would be a quintuplet of legendary Pokemon. 4 on the bottom, the Ruinous leader / gorilla at the top. Now, what's odd about this theory is that the ongoing idea with the Ruinous Pokemon is that they're based off the 4 perils in Chinese mythology, which are these 4 creatures that each have different abilities, and they're spoken about in different tales. And while they're removed a lot from the actual creatures they're based off, I mean, if I can show you 4 pictures of them, they each have like an ability or a physical attribute that can be compared to those. So we're not sure if they really are based off the perils, but a lot of them line up pretty well. Like, for example, Wo Xian, the snail man here, the peril that he seems to be connected to was also known for punishing people who do wrong and sometimes recording it, which is what Wo Xian is, right? It was born from the tablets that recorded the king's evil deeds, then the grass element formed out of it. So they line up pretty well. And you see, the reason why it's important to look into what these legendary groups are based off is because sometimes you can uncover more of the bigger picture. Like, for example, with Landorus, Tornadus, and Thundurus, they're based off the cardinal direction animals. And North was always missing, the black tortoise with the snake wrapped around it, so it made perfect sense when Enamorus was introduced exactly as that. Aside from it not being black, but the 4 of them don't reflect the appearances of the cardinal animals, they just get their inspiration from them. So the same in this situation, that's why it's important to look into them. And here's when I bring the bearer of bad news, which is that there is no 5th peril. So it kind of leaves us empty in how they could introduce a 5th Ruinous Pokemon, unless they do something outside of the box, where while you have the 4 perils, you can introduce a 5th one by being something like we talked about, which is the one who's affected by the perils. So, you know, while you have the 4 bringers of destruction, you can introduce a 5th one which was born from their destruction. So you can mess with the mythology in that sense. So that's one thing. But one thing that is kind of cool is that you have the Ruinous 4 with their Ruination move, right? And they're all dark types. You also have the Tapus, which are 4 fairy types with their Nature's Madness move. These moves do the exact same thing. So it's a cool way to look at them as counterparts. Maybe in ancient times they fought each other, like around the time these 4 Ruinous Pokemon were born from the greed of this king, that they actually went and attacked the Lola and the Guardians successfully defended them off. But it would just make them rivals in that sense. But that's for a different discussion. It would be cool if there was a leader to the Tapus that protected all of Lola in general, while the 4 Tapus just individually protected the islands. And then to counterpart that, you had a leader to the Ruinous Pokemon, which is actually the king that got turned into this greedy, all negativity awakened and corrupted Pokemon that maybe aided them in attacking Alola, maybe because Alola got something special. But that's not important. That's not what we're going to talk about in this video. In fact, we're talking about the complete opposite. I wanted to bring up a cool idea that Pokemon can do, which is that they introduced the Ruinous 4, and that the leader to this legendary trio is actually hated. You know, we got all sorts of legendary groups, right? Like Raikou and Suicune. They're all equal. And then when you add Ho-Oh, they bow down to their leader, Ho-Oh. You kind of consider them a 4 group. And then you've got other ones like Keldeo, where they belong to the Swords of Justice. It's actually a younger one rather than being the leader. And it's actually like mentored by the other Swords of Justice. And then even going into the 3 Musketeers lore, it's actually like the 4th edition to the group in that story too, the new edition. So we have all sorts of different takes for legendary groups. And so that's what I'm saying. We could have this as well, where we have a group of legendary Pokemon, and one of the members / the leader, the lower members hate them. You know, you would categorize them together because this leader, Paldean King Gorilla, would be very similar to them, right? we're gonna look at the Pokédex entries right now. They're all like negative Pokemon, awakened through negative human emotions. So the king would just be the ultimate form of that, and it would probably be a partial dark type with Ruination as one of its moves, same ability. So they do belong in the same group, except just the same way the 4 Ruinous Pokemon represent all the hate towards the king, even in its ruined form, they still hate him. So that would be a really cool new kind of legendary group Pokemon could introduce. And it could also tell a different story as to what happened after the kingdom fell, right? And why the Pokemon are scattered the way they are. You never know. Maybe, right? I was thinking about this when I was making the last video. You see how in the rumor speculating the king is sealed in Area 0, there's a map of the 4. What could have happened is the 4 Ruinous Pokemon naturally hunt down the king. And so after they sealed the 4 Ruinous Pokemon away, they left a map to get the 4 if the king is ever freed. You know, the ancient people left this as a last resort if the greedy king is ever freed from that chamber in Area 0. They're pretty much saying, yo, go and release the 4 Ruinous Pokemon. So it's like a guide to put the king back in his place if something happens. Now remember, if this 5th Ruinous Pokemon is what the new Mythical is, that means it's gonna be in the focus of the movie. And if we're going off the idea I was saying earlier, where this movie is gonna be consistent with the games and something Game Freak has to sign off on, then you could get the whole story of what actually happened when that kingdom fell explained to us. It could be something like when the kingdom is being destroyed by the Ruinous Pokemon, partially also because the king starts turning into this gorilla, that the Ruinous Pokemon actually fight the king there, and all of them are exhausted there, which is how someone was able to then seal all the Ruinous Pokemon away. If you think about it, if they're bringers of destruction like this, how did they get sealed in the first place? It makes sense that they were all weak right after the kingdom collapsed, and so they sealed all of them as far away from each other as possible. Remember, this would be 1,000 years ago, and then they took the king, put him in Area 0, and sealed him as well. And this actually leads to one more idea I wanted to talk about, which is that I've had a different perspective looking back on my last video about how the 5th seal might have gone down. You see, in the last video I was saying that they sealed the 5th Ruinous Pokemon in Area 0 in a different method because it was so strong. And they sealed it behind the steel slab into that cave, and it was stuck there forever. It can't get out. And then Heath comes through, pulls the slab out, and the gorilla sneaks out when he's not looking. I've had a different way to look at this. And this is a lot more eerie if you think about it, which is that if you look at Heath's book, right? Which way do I point? Okay, when you look at Heath's book, if you see how he shows the slab he found, it kind of looks like it's already nudged a bit. So here's an idea. What if the 5th Ruinous Pokemon was also sealed in the exact same way as the other 4, with this giant metal plate? Maybe it was colored freaking white or black because the greed is so, he reflects no light off him. He's so evil. And he broke out from inside. So pretty much what's supposed to be there is that sealed soup lid, and then the slab is on top of that, maybe written in a Polynesian language saying, warning, do not open. But all Heath finds when he goes there is no soup lid and only the nudge tablet. The king broke out of the seal from inside. That is terrifying. So you imagine, right, when they sealed him, they put all these stakes around Area 0 so that no one would be able to free him. But the moment he broke out, all the stakes magically fade away, because that's what happens, right? When you pick up all the stakes, they like turn to dust and just slowly reduce the seal, right? And so maybe he's so feral now that he's not able to think and realize he can climb the walls out of Area 0. And so he's just been wandering Area 0 ever since, and Heath catches that faint drawing of him. I actually like this idea more because you would imagine they must have sealed him the exact same way. And to imagine all these Ruinous Pokemon had to wait there because they were too weak compared to that behemoth who just pretty quickly after broke out is insane. I guess if you were to have some sort of in-game event, it could be like after you watch the movie you get a special item, and if you bring the 4 Ruinous Pokemon to Area 0, you lure out the king. Because the king probably hates the Ruinous Pokemon too, right? I suppose we'll go through their Pokédex entries next time, but they all have very interesting entries. It all talks about what negative emotions caused each of these Ruinous Pokemon. So for Ting Lu, he's born from fear that was poured into that ancient bowl, and this Pokemon grew out of it as the ground type. Then for Chi Yu, it was born from envy accumulated within those precious beads. and then it grew all this fire around it and took the shape of this fish. Shenpao was born from hatred, and this whole cat creature made of ice just forms out of the sword. And then the last one is the snail, which we know is from the tablets. It's born from grudge. So the grudge of a person writing the king's evil deeds on a wooden tablet became this grassy snail Pokemon. What's cool, right, is you see all the emotions I talked about, grudge, envy, fear, hatred. There's one missing, which is beautiful, greed. That could be what the king is born from, just pure greed. The greed of sending everyone down to Area Zero, the greed of getting all these artifacts from the merchant, getting tricked by him. And I don't even think it's the merchant's fault. This king was doomed to turn into this. His Pokedex entry is gonna be a speculation on the Pokedex's part, but we're gonna know the truth. It's gonna say something like, rumor is the Paldean king was so overwhelmed by greed that it turned into this Pokemon, but this is just speculation. That's what it's gonna say. The coolest part, my dude, is this king would probably have the 2-part Chinese name the same as them. It would fit perfectly with them, but he would be hated by the Pokemon that you're supposed to consider are a part of his group. But yeah, he would be something like a pure dark type, just because that's all he is. He has no secondary type. He's just pure ruination Pokemon. But yeah, make sure I'll shank that like button. I have an idea of how this movie could play out involving this king, so I'll make that in a few days. Well, I'll see you on the next one. Take care.